Let's start with water,
Sure.
because it is such a huge issue. CD4, but statewide, really. Years ago, Thornton bought up a bunch of farms around northern Colorado, and the city's now cashing in on those water rights for those farms. Douglas County is also considered, as you know, buying water from the San Luis Valley. Do you support urban areas taking water from rural areas?
No, I don't. It really is a challenging issue statewide, as you know, Sean. Water is a big issue for the entire state of Colorado, but for urban corridors to be drying up rural Colorado, it really is concerning for me. Now, I understand that some of the farmers are facing challenges with their crops and trying to make ends meet, but I think a lot of it has to do with regulations. A lot of it has to do with some of the demands that they put on farmers. And so I think it's most importantly that we maintain a balance between rural and urban as it pertains to the water use. And it is a challenge. And I think it's time that either the governor or others, like Congress, stay focused on there's an issue with water, specifically in Colorado and other states.
Let's talk about climate change. Is that real? And do humans play a role in it?
That's an interesting question, right? Because you read some of the science, and just like anything else, there are scientists that believe it is, and then you have scientists that say, no, that's not true. I think at the end of the day, what we need to make sure we understand is that we can't just blame nature on man, right? Nature has always gone through cycles. Here in Colorado, we can experience in a day the 4 seasons. We can be the morning can be snowy, and then in the afternoon it's sunny, and then it's blowing. So, I would say that, there is probably some contribution, but I wouldn't say that it's the driving factor between what's happening in our weather.
Wind energy is really a big economic driver in CD4 with Vestas there. Former President Trump has pledged to halt wind subsidies. Do you agree with that?
I do. I do believe that, we need to halt the wind subsidies because, again, right, the jury's still out whether it's really producing a lot of energy and what is the cost of that energy. My understanding, and I haven't validated this, but my understanding is that when those turbines, those blades break, there's no way to recycle them. They're being buried somewhere. And so we have to look at those, right? We have to look at how many of these are we going to put out there in rural Colorado. And for me, when I drive out there, it is sad to see a sea. It reminds me kind of the movie, where you have these aliens, coming across because they're so tall and they just kind of take away the beauty of the landscape of Colorado.
Should any form of energy, do you think, receive tax breaks? In other words, should there be winners and losers?
Well, I wouldn't say that there should be winners and losers. I think what we should be looking at is what is the energy source that really is going to help families, right, be a bit affordable. I think I have some concerns as to where we subsidize, and why? Because we're in a $35 trillion debt for the entire nation. And so when we're doing subsidies, we need to fully understand what it is that we're doing for the next generation. And so I have my own questions and concerns about who we are subsidizing.
So speaking of debt, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the national debt is projected to be 118% of gross domestic product in just 7 years. Do you support a constitutional balanced budget amendment? And if so, what would you do to make it happen?
I would. You know what? Every American in every state has to have a balanced budget. There is no reason why the federal government should not have to be required to follow the same principle. Because it's easy to spend other people's money. And it's easier to spend other people's money that are yet to be born because of the overall debt. What I would do is make sure that people understand that the importance of what's going to happen. If we keep going down this path, we're going to fall off the cliff. And people are going to realize what in the world happened to America. So now is the time for us to reevaluate how we're spending, where we're spending it. And I tell you right now, Sean, being a former federal employee, I don't hesitate at all to tell you that 30 to 40% of the federal budget is fraud, waste, and abuse. There's a lot of different things that we can do to make sure that we're not wasting money.
Are there any federal programs that you would cut?
I think
or agencies even?
All of them. Look, I'm going to tell you, every single agency is doing fraud, waste, and abuse. They're not necessarily performing at the level that they should. Most bureaucrats, and I'm going to tell you that's where a lot of that issue comes from. Most bureaucrats believe that once I'm a federal employee, I've hit the lotto. I don't have to work, I don't have to produce, I don't have to do anything. And so I would say that every agency suffers from that type of attitude. And I think it's time for Congress to ask those hard questions as to why is that happening across every single agency and why are things not moving forward the way they should.
So extending the 2017 tax cuts will cost approximately $2.5 trillion over the next 10 years. The tax cuts won't expand the economy enough to offset all of that cost. So do you support raising them? And if so, how would you pay for that?
Well, here's the thing, right? We talked about it earlier, right? Balancing the budget, right? Reallocating funds. I truly believe that if we really sat down as a Congress and actually did a budget, actually looked at a budget cycle and truly compared where the money's going for, I think we would find that, wow, there's a lot of waste here. I'm going to tell you, Sean, I printed the last omnibus bill for the $1.5 trillion. I was shocked on how they allocate the money because it's not a spreadsheet, it's a paragraph. It just says we need $178 billion to acquire equipment, ammunitions, resources to support, whatever branch of military there is. And that's true for every federal agency. It is a paragraph that they're requesting money through.
So would you cut the defense budget?
I think what I would do is reevaluate it. Okay, I'm not going to say that I would cut it. Remember, it's more about fraud, waste, and abuse, right? Are we using the money efficiently? Are we using it correctly? And why do you need money the next year? Look, I told you, I've been in the federal government, and you hear this at the state level, you hear it at the local level. They will all tell you we must spend every single dollar we get, or we're not going to get more next year. And so when you really look at what are you spending towards the end of the year, why are you buying furniture? Why are you buying computers? And it all comes down to, well, if we don't spend it, we're not going to get more next year. That is one of the mindsets that we need to correct.
Would you increase defense, do you think? Or is there any budget that you would increase at this point when you talk about them spending money just to get more?
I would probably increase the defense budget. However, I wouldn't ask for additional funds. I would reallocate funds from other areas, other sources, to make sure that we are having an ability to protect our nation, making sure that there's peace through strength. But I wouldn't necessarily support asking for more money. It's like reallocating our existing funds.
So let's talk about two of the big drivers of expenses at the federal level, and that's Social Security and Medicare. The latest Social Security and Medicare trustees reports say Social Security will be insolvent by 2035 and Medicare by 2036. And the trustees say in order to keep the program solvent, either the revenues need to increase by an amount equal to a permanent payroll tax increase of 3.3%, or benefits need to be permanently reduced for all current and future beneficiaries by nearly 21%, or a combination of those two. Do you support a payroll tax increase or a reduction in benefits?
Here's what I support, Sean. If you look at it, the Social Security is nothing more, currently, it's an accounting item. There is no bank account with all that money in there. It's just an accounting that we allocate this much, we need to make sure we pay this much. So how about we truly set aside funds specifically for Social Security and Medicare? Let's see where we stand. But I am here to tell you that there is no question about there's less births. We have a lot of baby boomers that are starting to retire. And so when you have less people contributing into that program, of course it's going to stretch it. We need to evaluate, because the younger generation will tell you, I don't think I'm ever going to get Social Security. And so what we need to do is figure out how do we maintain the services for those that have paid for their entire working years into Social Security, and how do we help the next generation? I think it really is something that if we sit down and evaluate it, I think we can come up with a solution.
So let's talk about some of the ideas for the solutions. Should investment income be taxed for Social Security, which it isn't right now?
I would say no. Okay, and the reason being is because you know what? This is how Americans can increase the dollar to work hard for them.
Should the retirement age be increased?
I think it wouldn't hurt to discuss moving it up, but I wouldn't move it up by 10 years. Maybe 3, maybe 4, maximum of 5. But this is a conversation that we need to have.
Should Social Security be means tested? In other words, should it be based on need or the amount of assets that a person has?
No.
Switch to health care, because health care spending is projected to rise faster than any other federal government program over the next few decades, actually. The Affordable Care Act made health care more accessible, but not more affordable. And that's in part because of its mandate around pre-existing conditions. Would you repeal that? Would you repeal the whole law?
I think I would and start over, okay? There's some good things in the Health Care Act, but there's also some things that we have to kind of shake our head at. Is like, why are we sending a message to the healthcare industry that government will pay for these costs? Because if they know government is going to pay for it and they realize that we just will issue money, so the cost goes up. Instead of looking at it from, and I'll give you a perfect example, right? I'm a veteran. I'm a disabled vet. You know, why is it that the VA hospital struggles in providing good service to veterans? Why can't we shore up that system and also be an example on how the healthcare system should work?
Do you support, though, the mandate on pre-existing conditions? Would you keep that in particular?
I think I would keep that, because I think it's important for us to recognize that there are some pre-existing conditions that prevent people from actually being able to fulfill their opportunities to work and so forth.
One of the big problems in rural Colorado is access to health care. And right now, Colorado's, of its 43 rural hospitals, half of them are in the red. And the CEOs say they can't get loans because banks see them as risks. So should the federal government help, and if so, how?
Well, here's what I would tell you. Remember, I used to be the director of the United States Small Business Administration, and so we give guaranteed loans to small business. Why can't we do the same thing for these hospitals? Why can't the federal government step in and say, you know what, we're going to guarantee these loans, and Mr. Banker, don't worry about whether they're going to pay you back or not. We're going to make sure that you become whole should something occur. We do it for small business. We should do it for rural hospitals.
So, given its enormous profits, should big pharma, do you think, be regulated, maybe more like the utilities are with the PUC, for example? Like at the state level, for example, Colorado has the Prescription Drug Affordability Review Board. You're familiar with that? And should we have something similar to that at the federal level, do you think?
I think we do, because they're becoming a monopoly. I mean, they're so huge, right, that really competitive markets don't exist anymore. So I think we need to reevaluate that. And I think we do need to send a message to them to say, you know what, you need to make sure that you're providing services that people can actually afford, because that's what we need to do as a government, is be a little bit of a watchdog, not necessarily regulate, but let them know we're paying attention and things aren't going in the right direction.
One of the biggest issues this election is immigration, of course. Former President Trump has vowed to, if reelected, to designate drug cartels in Mexico as terrorist organizations, to declare war on them, and to use the military against them without the consent of Mexico's government. And Mexico, as you know, is the largest trading partner of the U.S. So do you support the former president's plans? Why or why not? And if you do, what resources would you be willing to allocate for that?
Let me tell you, Sean, I just recently came back from the border. And I'm going to tell you, the cartel is our biggest issue. The cartel, from my perspective, runs the government of Mexico. There is no true government in Mexico. So our battle is with the cartels. I think we should declare them an enemy of the United States. I think we should use every military possibility that we can to prevent them from smuggling people, from what they're doing to the children, the drug trafficking. We are literally in a war, but a lot of people don't believe that because there's no explosions. There's no real bullets going back and forth. But I'm here to tell you, I have seen photos after photos after photos of individuals that did not make it across the border because the cartels left them behind. They didn't care about. It's an industry. It's a commodity. So I would strongly send a strong message along with President Trump to the cartel, not in America. We're going to stop you.
Do you support the former president's plans to rebuild the wall? Would you support funding to complete that wall along the southern border? And I guess where specifically would that money come from?
Well, once again, right, there was funds that were allocated. We have materials standing there. I would support building and finishing the wall. You know, Sean, I used to tell people that we've always had a wall, but it was an invisible wall, and people used to respect it. This was before the cartel figured out we can make millions and billions of dollars by charging everyone $7,500 per person to go across. Nobody crosses the border into America without the cartel getting money from them. There's about 18 to 22 different cartels that are operating along the border. This is not one. This is a full industry that's doing this.
Do you support ending birthright citizenship?
I do.
Do you support mass deportation? And if so, how would you accomplish that? Would you use the military, National Guard?
Well, let's talk about the definition of mass deportation, right? Some people will tell you what that means. They're going to go door to door, knocking on people. If they're not citizens, they're going to yank them out. They're going to put them in a truck, and before you know it, they're on a train back. I think mass deportation would be more about why are you here, right? There's a solution that I'm going to look to introduce in Congress for discussion. A good dear friend of mine by the name of Helen Kriebel used to live in Parker, Colorado. She started the leadership program of the Rockies, but she came up with a red card solution. And Congressman Pence at the time introduced it. Now this is a guest work program. And I have a card, in my wallet, that shows this is kind of like a credit card, but you have private placement agencies at the border. When people are looking for work, they're going to connect these workers with a company here, and this is all going to be a private organization. It's not going to be run by the federal government. What these companies will have is access to the background checks of the FBI and all those criminal cases. If they cannot feel that they can bring them in, then they're not going to connect them to an employer, because we do need workers here, but we need to do it correctly.
Speaking of the need for workers, the working age population in the U.S., as you might know, is shrinking.
Oh, yeah.
Due to falling birth rates, the rising retirement among baby boomers, and it's expected to get worse over the next couple decades. Since the pandemic, all new job growth on net has been due to foreign-born workers. Given that, would you support maybe a merit-based visa policy that would raise caps on visas for immigrants skilled in those high-need industries as a way of growing the workforce?
No, because here's what I believe, right? I think what we need to do is first remind our youth that there is no shame in working with your hands. There is no shame in being a carpenter, a framer, a plumber, a roofer. They all make six-figure incomes. And so we have to remind them that, hey, some of you will go to college, some of you may not go to college, but I believe that there's enough young Americans that we can at least cover 40 to 50% of that workforce. Do we still have a gap? Of course we do. But we need, again, through this red card solution, I think we can bring those types of employees into America. As far as the higher-ups, the doctors, the engineers, we have enough of those permits available. I don't think we need to increase those.
So you touched on this earlier, that farming is a big industry in CD4. Congress is currently negotiating a new 5-year farm bill. The Ag Committee approved an amendment to that bill that would close a loophole in the 2018 farm law that allowed for intoxicating hemp-derived products like the Delta-8 THC. Do you support closing that loophole? It would be a blow to some hemp farmers in Colorado.
It would, and I would support closing it, because Colorado was not built on hemp farming. It was built on ranching, and it was built on other crops. It's kind of like introduction of a crop, but let's take it slow. Let's not just rush into it. I mean, we rushed into the marijuana thing, and we look at the problems we run into. So I would say, you know what, let's make sure that doesn't happen, and let's just kind of study it.
The Justice Department reclassified marijuana recently as a Schedule III drug. Do you support that? And should it be removed from the Controlled Substances Act altogether, do you think?
No, I think we should leave it the way it is.
Schedule III.
Yep.
Let's talk foreign policy. Do you support the U.S. deploying troops to Taiwan if it's attacked by China?
Sean, the interesting thing for me, right, is become the next congressman, I'll be sitting on the Judiciary Committee, and I'll be sitting on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I think I don't know enough to understand to tell you, yes, we should. I believe there's an asset out there that we need to protect. To what extent, I'm not sure. I'm sure I'll get those debriefings when I'm there. But it is something that I think we definitely need to not walk away from them. It's a matter of how we do it.
Do you support aid for Ukraine? And what about Israel?
Those are tough ones too, and I can tell you that with Israel, I think we definitely need to do that. With Ukraine, I'm a little concerned about if we're protecting their border, why is it that we can't protect our border? There's kind of like a double standard here. And, I've been looking at it, and I think there's still a lot of questions as to they're not a NATO nation. And so is Putin truly trying to take over Europe again, or is he not? I think it's something that more conversations need to happen.
Should there be more conditions to the aid in Israel, do you think?
I think we definitely should not sneak in aid to Hamas in those types of bills. I think we need to be very specific on what it is that we want the funds to be utilized. There's nothing harm in putting conditions on how they're going to spend their money, as long as they're logical and reasonable. So I think it's probably a good idea.
So I have a few questions about should former President Trump get a second term. He says if reelected, he will reissue his 2020 executive order, which is known as Schedule F. It would reclassify many civil service workers as political appointees, and Schedule F is also part of what's known as Project 2025. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it was drafted by several conservative groups specifically for a second Trump term. And it would dismantle the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, EPA. It would eliminate the Departments of Education and Commerce, and it would make the Federal Communications Commission and Federal Trade Commission less independent. Do you support Schedule F and or Project 2025?
I can tell you, again, being a former federal employee, there's a lot of room for reforming and looking at things correctly. I would say yes, because you know what? It's not that the agencies are going to go away. It's more about the mindset inside the agencies. If employees have been there for 30 years, 20, and I'm going to tell you, there are politics being played inside the federal agencies. So there's nothing wrong in calling it out for what it is and restructuring it.
Former President Trump has also vowed, if reelected, to move a large chunk of the federal bureaucracy outside of Washington, similar to how he used the Bureau of Land Management to Grand Junction. It could impact up to 100,000 government positions. Do you support that?
I do. I really do. I think decentralizing our agencies is a very smart thing to do, because there's other parts of the country that will use that economy, right? They will create the jobs. Just because it's been there for the last 100 and some odd years doesn't mean it needs to stay there. I think that's a very wise thing to do as it pertains to creating economic stimulus across the entire country.
Former President Trump plans to impose a 10% tariff on all foreign goods sold in America if reelected, and a 60% tariff on Chinese imports. Do you support that? And why wouldn't that increase prices?
Well, here's the thing. I would support it, right? But we need to buy American. We need to start manufacturing again. I don't think an American will say, I don't mind spending another 50 cents or another $2 for an American-made product. I think it's important for us to stand tall and be independent. China truly controls a lot of our livelihoods. It wasn't until COVID-19 that I heard and found out that most of our pharmaceuticals are coming from China. So if they're an enemy of ours and they stop the supply chain, where are we going to be? So I think it's a really good thing to do.
Do you support overturning the 22nd Amendment so Trump could serve more than 2 terms?
No. I think it's important for us to have limitations on how long people can serve.
Do you think a sitting president can be charged with a federal crime? A sitting president, we're talking.
Well, I'm going to tell you that yes, because we need to have a standard that people must live up to. If they don't feel that they're going to be held accountable, who knows what they may or may not do.
Do you think a president should be able to pardon himself?
That's a very interesting question, right? It's kind of like, I'm judge and jury, I can do this. You know what? I think that's more of a legal type of discussion. I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Do you think presidents should be able to direct the Attorney General to bring criminal charges against individuals?
I think he should be able to bring evidence and assist to make sure that they're getting all the correct information before they make a decision.
Will you commit to accepting the results of the 2024 presidential election once any legal challenges have been decided by the courts?
I'm going to tell you this. You know what? The people will make an informed decision whether they're going to accept the 2024 election results. The jury's still out for me on the past election, but we got to move forward. Let's see what happens. But I think at the end of the day, we all want to make sure that our election integrity is intact. We'll see what happens.
Do you support a vote to remove Mike Johnson as Speaker?
No, I do not.
Will you endorse the Republican who wins
Of
the
course I will.
CD4 primary? Okay.
Yeah, they're going to take over my slot, so of course I will.
And lastly, maybe just, this is a 6-month, really, job.
Right.
Why run for this? Why did you?
You know what? I was in the military, right? And a lot of military personnel, when I say, hey, are you familiar with TDY? And they kind of laugh. They, yeah. I said, well, I'm going on TDY. This is a temporary duty assignment. My nation has called and said, we need someone that can step into the gap for 6 months while the people, the voters of CD4, make a good informed decision. And so I wanted to bring clarity and purpose to the special election. This is the second time in Colorado history that this has happened. And so when my country called and said, will you please step forward, I did. And that's what I'm going to do.